Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was May 25th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is The Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt cara companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is a short one, only about 6 lines long, but it's one that has really been discussed a whole lot in the scholarship. And it's because Violant is putting in the historical record that she is searching for a sidereal text, a text that has to do with magic, a manuscript that has spells in it. And so I'm first going to pick apart the document itself and go through, point out a couple things about it, and then I'm going to discuss the historiography here. All right, the document, well, first of all, it's on folio 16R of Register 2056, and this is the Secretum Register. So it's interesting because it is distinct for some reason from the Curiae Sigilli Secreti Register. This one is just called the Secretum, and it is actually a mishmash in its bound state. Basically, it was bound in the 18th century, and so there's a bunch of different secretum documents that have been put together, and they're kind of out of order, and they jump all over. So we have things from Violant's entire life in here. There's stuff from way into her old age, stuff around 1415, the year 1415. And so basically there's just a mishmash in this bound volume. It's called the Secretorum, but the document that we'll look at today, it has the same kind of seal level in the last sentence as the one that we were looking at from the Curiae Sigilli Secreti Register yesterday. So again, we come to the question of how are these things organized? How did the Chancery staff decide which were going to go into which categories? Still trying to sort that out. All right. Now, the page itself, look at how much white space there is above. I can't explain that. I don't know why they would have put so much space, except that right before this, you'll notice, okay, this is folio 16R. The first 15 folios are full of one long document, which is from a totally different period of time. I think it's from months ago, and it's about all these things that Violant is sending to Avignon as a just big list of requests. And so basically it doesn't have anything to do with this next stuff. And so I think that maybe that's the explanation for why there's so much white space here. But we really get to have a chance to look at the texture of the paper a bit more. And we can even see what I think is the watermark. So I've seen this symbol as a watermark before. And so in the space between the two written documents on this folio, I think that's a watermark and is an explanation of where the paper came from, its source. And I don't know enough about, there were watermarks at this time. I don't quite know enough about them to give you any more information about that. It could be that I'm wrong. Maybe that's not a watermark, but I think it is. All right. This document is one that we have at the top, La Reina, and then it starts out Antes Havem. So we get right into it. There's no introduction of the recipient here. It just says, we have come to understand, or we have an understanding that, and then we're going to get into the content in just a sec. The recipient is listed in an addressee line at the bottom. So we have de Rigior, and then I think this is Jorda for like the Catalan version of George. And then the surname, I believe, is de Sobra. So Jorda de Sobra. And then we have the title Doctor en Drets, Doctor of Law. And then we have Ciutada de Lleida. So there's a certain lawyer in Lleida, and that's who Violant is writing to. The probata is, I think, a pretty standard one. Well, maybe there's some stuff at the end that's weird. So it starts out with the name of the scribe, Pedro, maybe, Pedro de Besanta, Mandave Domine Regina. And then, although that doesn't look like an E at the end, it looks like an O above. But it's definitely different than the abbreviated letters that were appearing above the R in yesterday's document. So that's interesting. And then instead of facta per, we have facta ad. And then what is this? It looks like, is it REL? With an abbreviation through the L, something like relatia or something like that. And then we have Kammer, so like the Chamberlain, the Kammerlink. All right. Then we also have something at the end of the text block, an abbreviation that looks to me like some kind of pro-ho. So it's definitely PRO and then HO, and then we've got something above. I would not be prohomen, because that would not make sense. I am going to have to just hold off on trying to figure out what that stands for. But some kind of official of the court, of the Queen's court. All right, now, that's the apparatus. Let's get into the content. It starts off hot. Okay, here we go. We have come to understand that you have a book that was made by Sigo, a bishop of Lleida, and it's called the Cigonina. And that book is perle. It is for the Desfer Maleficis. Remember Maleficis? It could be interpreted in some contexts as just misdeeds, bad deeds. But Roca, the historian Josep Roca, and in other places the context has made it really clear that this is evil spells, curses, the evil magic, sorcery. All right, Desfer. Let's talk about Desfer. I just kind of read over that and it didn't process what that means. And then I will say that the output from the OpenClaw pipeline was helpful in this instance because it immediately translated that as to undo, right? Desfaire. So fair is to do something. Desfaire would be to undo. So this book is very clearly one that Violant has heard of that contains these spells that will undo the curses. Woohoo! All right, so we are definitely fighting fire with fire now. And the rest of the letter is basically saying give this book to the person who is presenting you this letter, the portador de la presente, and don't make any delay about it. We have a gran necessitat for it. We have a great necessity for it, and we'll buy it from you. All right. So that's the document. That's the whole thing. But it has been a resounding presence in the historiography. Antonio Rubio y Luc, I think, was the first modern scholar to find this document, but it could have been Roca. I'm not sure. Well, yeah, I can't quite remember which of them came first. Oh gosh, I'm really blanking on that. But the two of them were the ones that really highlighted this particular document. But its meaning for understanding how Joan and Violant related to sidereal content having to do with magic, that is not quite explained just by saying that Violant was looking for this book of counter curses. And the person that is super helpful to really understanding the context here is a faculty member at the University of New Mexico, who I know very well, Dr. Michael A. Ryan. And I just want to read out a paragraph from his book called A Kingdom of Stargazers, Astrology and Authority in the Late Medieval Crown of Aragon, because I think that Michael A. Ryan does an excellent job of contextualizing this particular document. It's page 119. Joan sometimes also dabbled in activities that were far more problematic than astrology, as in September 1386, when he requested to consult a book of geomancy, a complex divinatory practice that involved discerning patterns of the future through figures that appeared when a clump of dirt was thrown or when random lines were drawn. Some medieval writers decried this art as an occult science that drew its power from diabolic forces. In addition, in the summer of 1390, King Joan wrote the governor of Roussillon to requisition all of the books on necromancy that the priest, Blas de Corbera, had in his possession. Queen Violant also shared many of her husband's interests in less than orthodox practices. During a bout with a grave illness in 1387, Violant requested to consult a magical book written by the bishop of Lleida and Tortosa, Jaume Sigo, and thus titled Cigonina, to help her ward off the effects of witchcraft. So what Dr. Ryan does in that passage is he situates this particular document in this larger picture of how Joan and Violant were interested in the controversial elements of knowledge, the edge of acceptable knowledge, acceptable in terms of religious orthodoxy. They sought out texts about topics that were kind of like forbidden knowledge. They were not afraid to push the boundaries in terms of their own awareness of the world around them. And they were gutsy in this regard, because this kind of stuff could get you excommunicated if it was exposed. So this letter is, I think, a dangerous one. And the other thing that I need to point out about what Dr. Ryan has written in that paragraph, because he was focused on astrology, he doesn't go deeply into this part of exactly what was happening at this moment in 1387. There are other scholars who have also referred to this letter who have really confirmed what I think regular listeners of the podcast know, which is that it was Joan that was very ill, and that Violant had settled on an explanation for his illness as caused by sorcery, that Sibylla's advisors, or maybe even Sibylla de Fortia herself, had been involved in casting these spells on the king, and so she took it upon herself to, as I said earlier, fight fire with fire. If he's been the victim of some magical force, then if there's some text out there that specializes in how to counteract that magical force, then she wants to know about it, and she wants to use it as best as she's able to. Now, how would that exactly play out? I'm not sure. What was in this book? I don't know. I think there's some texts that explain a little bit more about what was in this book, but I haven't been able to go as deeply into the research on this. I'm not specializing in medieval magic, but anybody who is, this is a really super interesting moment to go deeper. I think that for the purposes of this podcast, trying to understand how Joan and Violant were working together, this is a super interesting moment because she is actively working in order to restore Joan's health. And she's pulling out all the stops. Like, this is clearly something that you're not supposed to be doing. Like, if you're following all the rules, and if you're a little bit worried about exploring topics that might be dangerous or diabolical, you're going to stay far away from this stuff. But Violant is maybe pushed by the severity of Joan's illness to, go for it. So we have here an instance where we see her determination, and also we can see maybe a tip of an iceberg here in terms of what the two of them were doing and how open they were to being nonconformist, right? To ignoring some of the rules of behavior that otherwise people would conform to. That was a little redundant. Anyway, a nonconformist streak. This is one of the things that really drew me to studying Joan and Violant. It's this nonconformist streak, and I think that it applies to culture, the magic, the music, the poetry, and it also applies to governance and gender roles. And so here in this moment that a lot of scholars have commented on, in which Violant is caught in the documentation being willing to explore this unorthodox territory, I think we see also in the rationale that she has for doing it a level of action and agency that is something very cool to behold. She's not just taking it. She's not just a witness to whatever's going on with Joan and his illness. She is actively using her power in order to do something. Now, did she get this book? I don't know. If she got this book or a book like it that had spells to undo evil curses, did she follow those spells? Was she the one that was concocting the potions or saying the incantations? I don't know. But I think from this letter, I don't see any reason why she would not have. So can we imagine Violant saying some kind of magical incantation in an effort to save Joan? I think it's reasonable to imagine that, and kind of cool to imagine that. Was it from this exact book, the Cigonina? Don't know. But my guess is that some point around late May, Violant is spending some time doing this. Now, she also continues to spend time in the more legitimate, acceptable means of trying to counteract whatever is ailing Joan in the spiritual realm. And later on this year, she actually does a pilgrimage to Montserrat. So she's just looking for whatever kinds of possible action might end up working to heal her husband, the king. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, and how could you not? I mean, we're talking about these really cool topics of these texts, these manuscripts of magic, and it's really into how ill is Joan? Is he really convalescing like she just wrote about or not? So many questions, right? So yes, I am leaving you with more questions than you arrived with. But that is the whole point of this, because remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.